The transport shuttle shuddered as it broke through 442B's atmosphere, its hull groaning under the stress of atmospheric entry. Inside the cramped passenger bay, 37 cadets from 12 different species sat in rigid silence, their breathing apparatus and environmental suits creating a symphony of mechanical whirs and hisses. The air recyclers worked overtime to accommodate the various atmospheric requirements of the diverse group. Pressed his face against the porthole, watching the alien landscape unfold below. Crimson forests stretched endlessly toward jagged mountain ranges that pierced the purple sky like broken teeth. 3 moons hung visible in the daylight, their surfaces with impact craters that spoke of violent histories. This world was beautiful in its hostility, a perfect testing ground for the Galactic Military Academy's most grueling survival exercise. "Attention, cadets," Commander's voice crackled through the intercom, his accent making the human words sound like grinding metal. "You will be deployed in standard formation across the northern continent. Your objective is simple. Reach the extraction point at coordinates 847.332 north, 1247.891 east within 72 standard hours. The exercise begins the moment your feet touch alien soil." Adjusted his tactical vest, checking the placement of his emergency beacon, water purification tablets, and the single nutrition bar that would need to sustain him for 3 days. Unlike his alien classmates, he carried no advanced breathing apparatus, no temperature regulation suit, no atmospheric analyzers. His human physiology was considered robust enough to handle most Class M worlds without additional support systems. The cadet sitting across from him, a being that resembled a walking crystal formation, flickered with nervous energy. Its translucent body pulsed with blue light as it communicated with its environmental suit's AI system. To his left, a cadet checked her breathing apparatus for the 100th time. Her species required a methane-rich atmosphere, and the breathing mask that covered her elongated skull looked cumbersome and fragile. "First deployment?" asked the, speaking slowly to allow the translation software time to process his words. The crystal being's response came through the universal translator in a voice like wind chimes. "Affirmative. Gravity is 0.73 standard. This world's gravity coefficient is 1.18. Compensation systems engaged, but mobility will be compromised." Nodded sympathetically. He had trained with cadets from low-gravity worlds before. They were often brilliant strategists and possessed incredible endurance, but high-gravity environments turned them into slow-moving targets. On the flip side, his human adaptability meant he could function reasonably well across a broad spectrum of environmental conditions, even if he wasn't optimized for any specific one. The shuttle's retro thrusters fired, and everyone was pressed back into their seats as the craft began its final descent. Through the porthole, could see the drop zone approaching, a clearing in the crimson forest surrounded by rocky outcroppings and what looked like dried creek beds. Intelligence reports had indicated the presence of indigenous wildlife, but the briefings had been frustratingly vague about specific threat levels. "Deployment in 30 seconds, Commander announced. "Remember, cadets, this is not just a test of your survival skills. This is an evaluation of your ability to adapt, overcome, and demonstrate the qualities that make your species valuable to the Galactic Defense Force. Some of you will excel. Others will learn the price of overconfidence." The shuttle touched down with a bone-jarring impact that rattled every piece of equipment in the cargo bay. Immediately, the rear cargo door began to cycle open, and alien atmosphere rushed in. His human nose detected the scent of something like cinnamon mixed with ozone, while his lungs processed the slightly higher oxygen content without difficulty. One by one, the cadets disembarked. They moved with careful, measured steps, its crystalline form catching and refracting the alien sunlight into prismatic rainbows. The cadet struggled with the increased gravity, her breathing mask fogging with each labored breath. A group of cadets clustered together, their forms chittering in their native language as they oriented themselves using pheromone markers. Was among the last to leave the shuttle, taking a moment to survey the landing zone before stepping onto the alien soil. The ground beneath his boots felt solid and stable, covered with what looked like rust-colored grass that crunched like autumn leaves. The air was warm but not oppressive, and the gravity, while noticeable, didn't significantly impair his movement. As the shuttle's engines spun up for departure, watched his fellow cadets spread out across the landing zone. Most were forming small groups based on species compatibility or shared environmental needs. They moved as a unit, their compound eyes constantly scanning for threats. A pair of cadets, their reptilian forms well suited to the warm climate, had already begun marking their territory with scent markers. But walked alone. It wasn't by choice, exactly. Human social patterns didn't align well with most alien pack mentalities, and his species' reputation for unpredictability made many aliens uncomfortable. Humans were known throughout the galaxy as adaptable generalists, capable of surviving in environments that would kill most species. But they were also known for their tendency toward violence when cornered and their disturbing ability to form emotional attachments to almost anything, including their enemies. As the shuttle disappeared into the purple sky, leaving behind only a dissipating contrail, consulted his navigation device and began plotting a route toward the extraction coordinates. The direct path would take him through the heart of the Crimson Forest, past several geographical features marked as potential hazards on his tactical display. He had barely taken 50 steps into the forest when the first scream echoed through the trees. Froze, his hand instinctively moving to the emergency beacon on his vest. The sound had come from somewhere behind him, back toward the landing zone. It was followed by a series of chittering calls that he recognized as distress signals, then an abrupt silence that was somehow more terrifying than the screaming. Through his earpiece, fragmented transmissions crackled with panic. Contact, contact, unknown hostile, approximately 4 meters tall, multiple appendages. The transmission cut off in a burst of static. Another voice, this one speaking through the translator. Crystal formation compromised, seeking immediate extraction. Then that voice, too, fell silent. Drew his sidearm, a standard-issue plasma pistol that felt reassuringly solid in his grip. The weapon was designed to be effective against a wide range of alien physiology, but he had no idea what kind of indigenous predators called this world home. The briefing materials had mentioned large fauna, but had provided no specific details about threat assessment or defensive protocols. A new sound reached his ears, a low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It was followed by heavy footsteps that made the ground vibrate beneath his boots. Whatever was making that sound was massive, and it was moving through the forest with the confidence of an apex predator in its own territory. Pressed himself against the trunk of one of the crimson trees, using its bulk to break up his silhouette while he scanned the forest around him. The alien vegetation provided excellent cover, but it also meant that threats could approach from any direction without being detected until they were dangerously close. The emergency beacon on his vest chirped softly, indicating that several other beacons had gone offline. In less than 10 minutes since the shuttle's departure, at least 6 cadets had either been killed or had suffered equipment failure severe enough to disable their survival gear. Given the sounds he had heard, strongly suspected the former. He forced himself to think logically about the situation. Something on this world was actively hunting the cadets, and it was efficient enough to take down multiple targets in rapid succession. The fact that the Academy had deployed them here meant that survival was possible, but it also meant that this was intended to be a real test with real consequences. Began moving deeper into the forest, staying low and using the alien vegetation for concealment. His human night vision was better than most species, and his ability to move quietly through rough terrain was one of the few advantages his physiology offered in this situation. As he moved, he became aware of another sound, something large crashing through the underbrush parallel to his position. It was keeping pace with him, maintaining a constant distance of perhaps 30 meters. Couldn't tell if he was being stalked or if whatever was out there was simply moving in the same direction, but every instinct developed over millions of years of human evolution was screaming at him to find better cover. He spotted what looked like a rocky outcropping about 200 meters ahead, partially concealed by the crimson foliage. If he could reach it, he might be able to get a better view of his surroundings and possibly identify the source of the sounds that were tracking his movement. Broke into a controlled run, weaving between the alien trees while trying to maintain as much cover as possible. Behind him, the crashing sounds grew more intense, and he could hear what sounded like multiple large creatures converging on his previous position. He reached the rocky outcropping and scrambled up its steep face, using handholds that had been carved by wind and weather into the alien stone. From the top, he had a commanding view of the forest canopy and could see several large shapes moving through the trees below. They were difficult to make out through the foliage, but they appeared to be quadrupedal, roughly the size of earth elephants, with elongated limbs that ended in what looked like razor-sharp claws. One of the creatures paused directly below his position and got his first clear look at a native predator of 442B. The thing was a nightmare fusion of insect and mammal, with a chitinous exoskeleton covered in coarse fur. Its head was elongated like a crocodile's, but filled with multiple rows of serrated teeth. 6 legs ended in claws that could easily disembowel a human, and its tail was tipped with a barbed stinger that dripped with some kind of venom. As watched in fascination and horror, the creature raised its head and sniffed the air. Its sensory organs, whatever they were, seemed to be having difficulty pinpointing his location. The rocky outcropping was apparently masking his scent signature enough to confuse the predator's hunting instincts. More disturbing was what happened next. The creature made a series of clicking sounds that were answered by similar calls from at least 3 other directions. Realized he was observing pack behavior from an apex predator species that used coordinated hunting tactics. His earpiece crackled with another transmission. "This is Cadet Raw. Does anyone copy? I'm trapped in a cave system approximately 2 kilometers south of the landing zone. Multiple hostile contacts have established a perimeter. Request immediate assistance." Recognized the voice as belonging to the cadet who had been checking her breathing apparatus on the shuttle. The transmission was weak and distorted, suggesting that she was indeed underground and that her equipment was running low on power. Below him, the pack of alien predators had spread out in what was clearly a search pattern. They were methodically checking every possible hiding spot, working outward from his last known position. It would only be a matter of time before they thought to check the rocky outcropping. Made a decision that would have seemed insane to most other species, but felt perfectly natural to his human instincts. Instead of waiting to be discovered, he would take the initiative and go on the offensive. He carefully aimed his plasma pistol at the largest of the predators and fired a single shot. The energy beam struck the creature's center mass, and it collapsed with a shriek that echoed through the forest like a train whistle. The other predators immediately converged on their fallen pack mate, but instead of showing concern or attempting to provide aid, they began tearing it apart and consuming it. The brief distraction gave the opportunity he needed to climb down from the outcropping and begin moving toward the coordinates where the cadet was trapped. It was a calculated risk. Helping another cadet would slow his progress toward the extraction point, but it might also provide him with valuable intelligence about the threats they were facing. As he moved through the forest, became aware of something strange. The predators that had been actively hunting him seemed to have withdrawn. He could still hear them in the distance, but they were no longer tracking his movement. It was as if his willingness to fight back had somehow changed their assessment of him as prey. The phenomenon became more pronounced as he continued toward Cadet Ra's position. Other indigenous life forms that he encountered, smaller predators, scavengers, even herbivorous creatures that should have been harmless, all seemed to give him a wide berth. They would watch him pass, but none of them approached or showed aggressive behavior. It was as if something about his presence was broadcasting a message that other creatures understood instinctively. This is not prey. This is something that fights back. This is something dangerous. Reached the cave system where the cadet was trapped just as the alien sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of deep purple and gold. The cave entrance was partially concealed by fallen rocks, and he could see the faint glow of emergency lighting from within. More importantly, he could see the tracks and claw marks that indicated the area was being actively patrolled by the same species of predator he had encountered earlier. "Cadet Ra," he whispered into his communicator, "this is Cadet. I'm outside your position. How many hostiles are you tracking?" Her response came immediately, filled with relief and desperation. "Thank the ancestors. I count at least 5 of the large predators maintaining a perimeter around the cave entrance. My breathing apparatus was damaged during the initial attack, and I'm running on reserve power. I have maybe 6 hours of breathable atmosphere remaining." Studied the tactical situation. 5 apex predators in coordinated defensive positions, unknown territory, and a wounded ally who couldn't survive in the local atmosphere without life support. Under normal circumstances, it would be considered suicide for a single cadet to attempt a rescue operation. But as he watched the predators patrolling their perimeter, noticed something that gave him hope. They were maintaining their distance from the cave entrance, as if something about the location itself made them uncomfortable. More tellingly, when the wind shifted and carried his scent toward them, several of the creatures lifted their heads and then deliberately moved further away from his position. Whatever message his presence was broadcasting, it was becoming stronger. Smiled grimly and began checking his equipment. He had enough ammunition for perhaps 20 shots, a single nutrition bar, and a growing reputation among the local wildlife as something that was better left alone. It was time to find out just how far that reputation would carry him, crouched in the alien underbrush, studying the predators that had surrounded Cadet Ra's cave refuge. The creatures moved with the calculated precision of experienced hunters, each one maintaining its position while constantly scanning for threats. Their coordination was impressive, but had spent enough time observing human pack hunters to recognize the weakness in their strategy. They were focused entirely on preventing escape, not on defending against an external attack. The largest of the 5 predators was positioned directly in front of the cave entrance, its massive form blocking any possible exit route. Its head swayed back and forth in a hypnotic pattern, and could see that its sensory organs were focused entirely on the cave opening. The other 4 had spread out in a rough semicircle, creating an overlapping field of observation that should have made any approach impossible. But had spent his childhood hunting deer through the forests of North America, and he understood something about predator behavior that most galactic military academies didn't teach. Apex predators were used to being the most dangerous thing in their environment. They didn't expect to become prey themselves. Activated his communicator and whispered, "Ra, I need you to do exactly what I tell you when I tell you. How much power do you have left in your portable lighting?" Her response came back weak and distorted. "Perhaps 30 minutes at current consumption rate. These creatures have been here for hours. They're not going to leave, and I don't think they're planning to come in after me. It's like they're waiting for something." "They're waiting for you to run out of breathable air," replied grimly. "It's a siege strategy. They know you can't stay in there forever, so they're just going to wait until desperation forces you to come out on their terms." Through his scope, could see the creatures' breathing patterns, the way their bodies shifted position every few minutes to prevent muscle fatigue, the careful attention they paid to wind direction and scent markers. These were not mindless beasts. They were intelligent hunters executing a sophisticated strategy. But they had never encountered anything like a human being. Pulled out his nutrition bar and broke it into 5 small pieces. Each piece was roughly the size of a large marble, dense with concentrated proteins and carbohydrates that would provide a brief energy boost to any carbon-based life form. More importantly, the bar's artificial flavoring created a scent signature that registered as food to most predatory species. Working carefully and silently, began placing the pieces of nutrition bar in a specific pattern around the predator's perimeter. Each piece was positioned just far enough away from the creatures to require them to move from their current positions if they wanted to investigate the scent. It was a simple trap, based on the assumption that even apex predators could be distracted by the possibility of easy food. As the alien wind carried the scent of the nutrition bar pieces across the clearing, watched the predators' behavior begin to change. Their heads lifted, nostrils flaring as they processed the new information. The largest creature, still guarding the cave entrance, made a low rumbling sound that seemed to be some kind of communication signal. 2 of the smaller predators broke from their positions and began moving toward the nearest pieces of nutrition bar. They approached cautiously, but their attention was now divided between watching the cave and investigating this new potential food source. Waited until both creatures were committed to their new positions before making his move. Instead of approaching the cave directly, he circled around to the left flank, moving through the alien vegetation with the practiced stealth of a human persistence hunter. The 3rd piece of nutrition bar had been placed near a cluster of the crimson trees that would provide excellent cover for his approach. As the 3rd predator moved to investigate, was able to get within 15 meters of its position without being detected. At this range, his plasma pistol would be devastatingly effective, but hesitated before taking the shot. Killing the creature would certainly eliminate one threat, but it would also alert the others to his presence and potentially trigger a coordinated attack that he might not be able to survive. Instead, he chose a different approach. Deliberately stepped on a fallen branch, creating a sharp snapping sound that immediately drew the predator's attention. The creature spun toward the sound, its claws extended, and its mouth opened to reveal those terrifying rows of serrated teeth. But instead of attacking or retreating, stood perfectly still and stared directly into the predator's eyes. What happened next? Everything the Galactic Military Academy taught about contact protocols. The predator, despite being larger, stronger, and better armed than the human cadet, froze in place. Its aggressive posture gradually shifted to something more defensive, and after several long seconds, it actually took a step backward. Had encountered this phenomenon before, during survival training on Earth. Many predatory species, when confronted by a potential prey animal that showed no fear and demonstrated willingness to fight, would reassess the threat level and often choose to avoid confrontation rather than risk injury in an uncertain battle. But this was more than simple threat assessment. The predator's body language suggested something closer to recognition, as if it was acknowledging as a fellow apex predator rather than potential prey. Maintaining eye contact, slowly drew his plasma pistol and aimed it at the creature's center mass. The predator's response was to lower its head in what could only be described as a submissive gesture before backing away into the forest. Ra whispered into his communicator, "I'm going to create a distraction. When I give the signal, use your portable lighting to create as much illumination as possible. Don't come out of the cave, but make it obvious that you're still alive and active." "Understood," came her weak reply. "But what are you planning? These creatures are incredibly dangerous." Smiled grimly as he watched the remaining 4 predators, beginning to realize that one of their pack had withdrawn from the perimeter. "I'm planning to have a conversation with the local wildlife about territory and hunting rights." The largest predator, still positioned at the cave entrance, had begun making a series of clicking sounds that were clearly some form of communication. The other creatures responded with their own vocalizations, and could see them beginning to tighten their perimeter around the cave. Time was running out. If Ra's breathing apparatus failed while she was still trapped, the entire rescue attempt would be pointless. Stepped out of the tree line and began walking directly toward the largest predator. His approach was deliberate and confident, the walk of a persistence hunter who had tracked his prey across thousands of kilometers and was ready to claim his prize. He kept his plasma pistol visible but not directly aimed, sending a message that he was prepared to fight but wasn't immediately threatening. The effect on the pack was immediate and dramatic. The creatures that had been investigating the nutrition bar pieces abandoned their positions and began converging on its location, but their movement patterns were defensive rather than aggressive. They were responding to a potential threat, not attacking prey. The largest predator rose to its full height, which estimated at nearly 4 meters. Its bulk blocked out most of the alien starlight, and its breath created visible vapor clouds in the cooling air. When it vocalized, the sound was like nothing had ever heard, a combination of roar, shriek, and mechanical grinding that seemed to vibrate through his bones. Stopped walking when he was approximately 10 meters from the creature, and slowly raised his plasma pistol until it was aimed directly at the predator's head. "This is my territory now," he said aloud, even though he knew the creature couldn't understand human language. "That cave and everything around it belongs to me. You can leave, or you can find out why my species conquered our." The predator stared at him for several long seconds, its alien intelligence clearly processing this unprecedented situation. Then, incredibly, it stepped aside. Not retreating exactly, but moving just far enough to clear the cave entrance while maintaining its position within the clearing. The other creatures followed suit, creating a corridor that led directly to where Ra was trapped. "Now," commanded into his communicator. The cave entrance suddenly blazed with artificial light as Ra activated every illumination device she had available. The brilliant white radiance created stark shadows across the clearing and reflected off the predator's chitinous exoskeletons like scattered diamonds. But the creatures didn't flee from the light, and they didn't attack the cave opening. Instead, they maintained their new positions, watching with what could only be described as respectful attention. Began backing toward the cave entrance, keeping his weapon trained on the largest predator while scanning for any signs of aggressive behavior from the pack. The creatures tracked his movement, but made no attempt to close the corridor they had opened for him. "Ra, I'm at the cave entrance," called softly. "How mobile are you?" Her response came from just inside the cave opening. "My breathing apparatus is functioning but damaged. I can move, but not quickly, and I'll need to monitor my air supply constantly. We're going to walk out of here together, told her. Stay behind me, keep your lighting active, and whatever happens, don't show any fear. These creatures respond to confidence. Cadet Ra emerged from the cave, her environmental suit obviously damaged, and her breathing mask creating visible stress fractures with each inhalation. It was roughly humanoid in shape, but taller and more slender than, with elongated limbs and a skull that housed complex respiratory adaptations for her species' methane-rich. "By my ancestors," she whispered as she saw the circle of predators surrounding them. "How did you?" Later, interrupted. "Right now, we need to get to the extraction coordinates. Can you navigate while monitoring your life support?" Affirmative. The route should take us through approximately 15 kilometers of forest terrain. At standard pace, perhaps 8 hours of travel time. Calculated quickly. 8 hours would bring them to the extraction point well within the mission timeline, but it would also mean traveling through the alien forest during both night and day cycles. They would encounter more of the indigenous wildlife, and there was no guarantee that his unusual rapport with this particular pack would extend to other predator species. "We move now," decided. "Stay close, keep your breathing steady to conserve air, and follow my lead." They began walking across the clearing, directly through the corridor the predators had created for them. Kept his plasma pistol ready but not aimed, maintaining the delicate balance between demonstrating capability and avoiding unnecessary provocation. As they passed the largest predator, the creature made a low, rumbling sound that seemed almost conversational. Surprised himself by responding with a respectful nod, as if acknowledging one apex predator's courtesy to another. The forest beyond the clearing was darker and more dense than the area around the cave system. His human night vision gave him a significant advantage in the low-light conditions, but Ra's breathing apparatus included infrared sensors that allowed her to navigate effectively despite her species' poor natural night vision. They had been walking for perhaps 30 minutes when became aware that they were being followed. The sounds were subtle, the occasional snap of a branch, the rustle of foliage being disturbed by something large, the soft pad of feet on forest floor that was just slightly out of rhythm with their own movement. Multiple creatures were packing them through the forest, staying just beyond visual range but close enough to observe their progress. Ra whispered, "My sensors are detecting at least 7 large life forms moving parallel to our position. Are we being hunted?" Considered the question carefully. The creatures following them weren't attempting to hide their presence completely, which suggested they weren't planning an ambush. Their movement patterns seemed more consistent with escort behavior than stalking. "I don't think we're prey anymore," replied quietly. "I think we're being given safe passage." As if to confirm his theory, a new sound echoed through the forest. The distress call of some kind of alien herbivore, followed by the terrifying roar of a different predator species. The sounds came from directly ahead of their planned route, indicating a dangerous encounter between indigenous wildlife. Immediately, the creatures that had been following them changed their movement pattern. Instead of maintaining their distant escort positions, they moved ahead of the 2 cadets and disappeared into the forest in the direction of the disturbance. Within minutes, the sounds of conflict escalated into a full-scale battle between multiple predator species. Roars, shrieks, and the crash of large bodies through vegetation created a cacophony that could probably be heard for kilometers. Then, gradually, the sounds diminished. When silence returned to the forest, the escort creatures resumed their previous positions, once again packing the 2 cadets through the alien woodland. "They cleared the path for us," Ra said in amazement. "What did you do back at the cave? How did you communicate with them?" Wasn't entirely sure himself. The interaction had operated on instinctual levels that he couldn't fully explain or replicate. But he was beginning to understand that his species' reputation throughout the galaxy was based on more than just adaptability and survival skills. Humans were persistence hunters. They had evolved to track prey across vast distances, to outlast larger and stronger animals through sheer determination and endurance. But they were also pack hunters, capable of coordinating complex strategies and working together to bring down creatures that no individual human could face alone. Most importantly, humans were willing to fight when fighting meant the difference between survival and death. They would stand their ground against impossible odds, and they would inflict terrible damage on anything that threatened them, even if that defiance ultimately cost them their lives. The predators of 442b had recognized something in that they understood and respected: the willingness to be dangerous when danger was necessary. As they continued through the forest toward the extraction coordinates, began to realize that this survival exercise was teaching him something the Galactic Military Academy couldn't provide in any classroom or simulation. The knowledge that humanity's place in the galaxy wasn't defined by superior technology or advanced intelligence, but by the simple fact that humans were willing to fight for what mattered to them, regardless of the odds. And sometimes, that willingness to fight was all the weapon they needed. Dawn on 442b painted the forest in shades of gold and crimson as the alien sun crested the jagged mountain peaks. And Ra had been walking for 6 hours straight, their escort of indigenous predators maintaining a respectful distance while ensuring their safe passage through increasingly dangerous terrain. Ra's breathing apparatus was showing critical stress indicators, the damaged systems struggling to maintain adequate atmospheric filtration for her physiology. Each breath created visible condensation on her mask's interior, and could see her shoulders trembling with the effort of maintaining their pace. "How much air do you have left?" asked during their brief rest stop beside what appeared to be a mineral spring. Ra consulted her suit's diagnostic display, her elongated fingers dancing across alien interfaces. "Perhaps 2 hours of breathable atmosphere at current consumption rate. If I reduce physical activity and enter minimal oxygen mode, possibly 3 hours. Checked his navigation device. They were still 8 kilometers from the extraction coordinates, with terrain that included a river crossing and what the tactical maps indicated was a steep canyon system. Even pushing their pace to dangerous levels, they needed at least 4 more hours of travel time. "There's something you need to know about human physiology," said carefully. "My species can function in this atmosphere indefinitely. The oxygen content is actually higher than our optimal range, and the trace gases don't interfere with our respiratory systems." Ross stared at him through her damaged breathing mask. "You're saying you could share your air supply with me?" "I'm saying I might be able to help, but it would require trust and possibly some improvisation that goes against your species' survival protocols." Before Ra could respond, one of their escort predators emerged from the forest edge and approached their rest position. Had begun to recognize individual creatures within the pack, and this was the same large specimen that had stepped aside at the cave entrance. Its approach was deliberate but non-threatening, and it carried something in its mouth that it dropped carefully at its feet. The object was a section of what appeared to be advanced breathing apparatus, obviously salvaged from one of the other cadets who hadn't survived the first day of the exercise. The technology was in design, built for silicon-based life forms, but the filtration systems were universal enough to potentially interface with Ra's damaged equipment. "It's offering to help," realized aloud. "This creature understands that you're dying, and it's providing resources that might save your life." Ra reached out slowly and picked up the salvaged breathing apparatus. Her hands trembled as she examined the alien technology, looking for interface points that might be compatible with her own systems. "The filtration matrix is intact," she reported with growing excitement. "If I can adapt the connection protocols, this could extend my air supply by several hours." While Ra worked on jury-rigging her life support systems, studied their escort predator more carefully. The creature was watching her repair work with obvious interest, occasionally making soft, clicking sounds that seemed almost conversational. "You understand more than we gave you credit for, don't you?" asked the predator, knowing it couldn't understand human language but somehow feeling that communication was still taking place. The creature tilted its massive head and made a sound that was distinctly different from its usual vocalizations. If had to interpret the tone, he would have said it sounded almost amused. Ra called softly, "The repair is working. My air supply has been extended by approximately 4 hours, but there's something else you should see." She held up a small device that had been attached to the salvaged breathing apparatus, an emergency beacon, still active and transmitting. The display showed multiple signals scattered across the forest, indicating that several other cadets were still alive and moving toward the extraction coordinates. "At least 12 survival signals are still active," Ra reported. "But they're spread across a wide area and some of them aren't moving, I think there are other cadets who are trapped or injured. Consider their options. They could continue directly toward the extraction point, ensuring their own survival but abandoning any cadets who might need assistance. Or they could deviate from their route to provide aid, risking both their lives and their chances of completing the exercise successfully. For a human being, it wasn't really a choice at all. "Show me the closest signal that isn't moving," said. The beacon indicated a stationary survival signal approximately 2 kilometers off their direct route, positioned near what the tactical maps showed as a series of rocky ravines. If they moved quickly, they could reach that position, assess the situation, and still make it to the extraction coordinates before the deadline. "That signal belongs to Cadet," Ra said, consulting her academy roster. His species are natural climbers, but they don't handle cold temperatures well. Nodded, were reptilian in nature, dependent on external heat sources to maintain their body temperature and metabolic functions. If Cadet was trapped in a rocky area during the cool alien morning, he could be in serious danger of entering hibernation mode, which would be fatal if he couldn't reach warmth before his core temperature dropped too far. "We go after him," decided. "No cadet gets left behind." Their escort predator seemed to understand the change in plans, because it immediately began moving in the direction of the emergency beacon. The other creatures that had been following them adjusted their positions accordingly, maintaining their protective formation while adapting to the new route. The terrain grew more challenging as they moved toward the ravine system. The crimson forest gave way to rocky ground covered with loose stone that shifted treacherously underfoot. Ra's breathing apparatus continued to function, but the increased physical demands of climbing over rough terrain were consuming her air supply faster than anticipated. They reached the beacon location just as the alien sun reached its zenith, casting sharp shadows across a landscape of broken stone and deep chasms. The emergency signal was coming from somewhere below them, in a ravine that dropped at least 30 meters into darkness. Called down into the ravine, "This is Cadet, report your status." A weak response echoed up from the depths. "Here, trapped by rockfall, core temperature dropping, cannot climb." Peered over the edge of the ravine and could just make out a reptilian form huddled against the far wall, partially buried under loose stone. The cadet was clearly in hibernation mode, his metabolism slowing to conserve energy in the absence of sufficient heat. "The ambient temperature down there is probably 15 degrees colder than up here," Ra observed. That's life-threatening. Even if we could get him free of the rockfall, he wouldn't have the energy to climb out." Studied the ravine walls, looking for possible climbing routes or anchor points for a rescue rope. The academy had provided them with minimal equipment, but he did have approximately 50 meters of lightweight climbing cord that was intended for emergency use. "I'm going down," announced. "You stay here and monitor the beacon signals. If something happens to me, continue to the extraction point." "That's madness," Ra protested. "Even if you can reach him and free him from the rockfall, how will you get him back up? A hibernating probably weighs twice what you do." It was a valid point, but had already begun securing his climbing rope around a sturdy rock outcropping. Human upper body strength was formidable compared to most other species, and his bone density was sufficient to handle the stress of supporting additional weight during a climb. More importantly, something was happening with their escort predators that might provide an unexpected solution to the rescue problem. The creatures had arranged themselves around the ravine opening in what looked like a coordinated formation. The largest predator was positioned directly above the point where Cadet was trapped, and it was making a series of vocalizations that seemed to be directed downward into the ravine. "They're trying to communicate with him," realized. "They understand that he's in distress, and they're attempting to provide some kind of assistance." As rappelled down the ravine wall, he could hear the predators above him coordinating their efforts with increasingly complex vocalizations. When he reached the bottom of the ravine, he found Cadet partially conscious but severely hypothermic. "Hang on," said as he began clearing loose stone away from the sledges. "We're getting you out of here." The reptilian cadet's response was barely audible. "Cannot move, too cold, leave me." "Not happening," replied firmly. "My species doesn't abandon our people, and that includes adopted pack members." Working quickly, managed to free from the rockfall, but that was clearly unable to support his own weight. His body temperature had dropped to the point where his muscles weren't responding properly, and his breathing had slowed to barely detectable levels. Activated his emergency beacon and spoke into his communicator. "This is Cadet. I have Cadet, but he's hypothermic and unable to climb. I need a way to get him 30 meters up a vertical rock face." The response came from Ra. "The Predators are doing something up here. It's like they're working together on some kind of construction project." Looking up toward the ravine opening, could see the silhouettes of the escort creatures moving around the edge of the chasms. They seemed to be manipulating something, dragging objects into position with their powerful claws. Then he heard a sound that made him smile despite their desperate situation, the whistle of rope falling through the air. A thick vine, obviously torn from one of the larger forest trees, dropped down into the ravine and landed beside him. It was followed by another vine, and another, until he had access to what appeared to be a crude but functional pulley system constructed by the Predators. "They built us a lift," called up to Ra. "These creatures are engineering a solution to get out of here." Working together, and the escort Predators managed to create a harness system that would allow them to raise the hibernating to the surface. It took nearly an hour of careful coordination, with guiding the vine system from below while the Predators provided the lifting power from above. When Cadet finally reached the surface, Ra was ready with emergency heat packs from her survival kit. The combination of increased ambient temperature and direct thermal support began to reverse his hypothermia, and within minutes his reptilian metabolism was showing signs of recovery. "By the sacred stones," whispered as his body temperature returned to functional levels, "what happened? How did you reach me?" "Teamwork," replied, gesturing toward their escort Predators. "It turns out we're not the only intelligent species on this planet, and some of the locals decided we were worth helping." Stared in amazement at the creatures that had participated in his rescue. For a who came from a species that valued engineering and construction above all other skills, the sight of wild predators coordinating complex mechanical solutions was profoundly impressive. "They understand tool use," observed with professional admiration, "and they can solve problems cooperatively. These creatures aren't just intelligent, they're showing signs of civilization." The largest of the escort Predators approached their group and made a series of sounds that had become familiar to over the past several hours. The tone was different this time, more urgent, and it was accompanied by gestures that seemed to indicate direction. "It's trying to tell us something," realized. "Something about the route to the extraction coordinates." Ra consulted her navigation device and emergency beacon display. "There's something you need to see. The extraction coordinates have changed. The Academy has moved the pickup point approximately 5 kilometers south of the original position." "Why would they do that?" asked, his strength returning as his core temperature stabilized. Studied the new coordinates on the tactical display and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the alien climate. The new extraction point was located in the middle of what the survey data indicated was territory controlled by a different species of predator, one that the initial briefings had classified as extremely hostile to all biological life forms. "It's not a change in the extraction point," realized grimly. "It's a trap. Something has compromised the Academy's communications, and someone is trying to lure the surviving cadets into a killing ground." Their escort predators were becoming increasingly agitated, making warning calls that echoed across the ravine system. More creatures were emerging from the forest, different species that hadn't encountered before, but all showing the same behavioral patterns. Protective positioning around the 3 cadets, with attention focused toward the south. "They're trying to warn us," Ra said with growing understanding. "These creatures know there's danger in that direction, and they're trying to prevent us from walking into it." Checked his chronometer. They had less than 6 hours remaining before the extraction deadline, but the original coordinates were still 12 kilometers away through increasingly hostile territory. The false coordinates were much closer, but approaching them would likely mean walking into whatever trap had been set for the surviving cadets. "We stick to the original plan," decided. "We go to the real extraction coordinates, and we trust our escort to help us get there safely." Struggled to his feet, his physiology now fully recovered from the hypothermia. "There are at least 12 other survival signals still active across this region. If we're right about the communications being compromised, those cadets are going to walk directly into the trap." "Then we warn them," replied, activating his emergency beacon's broadcast function. "All surviving cadets, this is, the extraction coordinates have been compromised. Do not approach the southern position. Repeat, the southern extraction point is a trap. Maintain original coordinates and exercise extreme caution." Whether the other cadets would receive the warning, or whether they would trust it if they did, remained to be seen. But as their escort predators began moving toward the original extraction coordinates, Ra and followed, trusting their lives to the protection of creatures that had already proven themselves to be far more than simple beasts. Behind them, the forest echoed with the sounds of distant conflict as other predator species began converging on the false extraction coordinates. Whatever trap had been set was being sprung, but instead of catching the surviving cadets, it was drawing the attention of every dangerous creature on the planet. Smiled as he realized what was happening. The escort predators weren't just protecting 3 Academy cadets. They were protecting their territory from an invasion by whatever forces had tried to manipulate the exercise. And that meant the final stretch of their journey would test not just their survival skills, but their ability to function as part of a pack that included some of the most dangerous creatures in the galaxy.